Well, we have sound but no picture because we have a camera initializing and we have no video, which is exciting. Which is funny because I can see the video in this one tab. Oh, here we go. Yay, we have a picture. A webcam shouldn't have software. I'm going to say that to start the day. Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron. Oh, it's so dark. Which, speaking of darkness and everything, if you didn't know that it was fall, you would know now, especially today, because fall has arrived here to fabulous New England. It is rainy, it is cloudy, it is cold, and it's just, yeah, fall came in today in a big way. It was a high of 55, and it was a lot. It was a lot. It's a lot. Anyway, despite my it's just been fall is here. I was gonna mention starting with fall and the camera didn't work, but fall is here. Fall is in force, and it's as inconvenient as it is to do things outside. I love how cozy it is. I'm a very cozy person. It was lovely waking up this morning. The house was a bit chilly. I was under the duvet cover. Maximum cozy. I love a cozy situation. Um, if you don't know, my name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour, where each week I bring the latest and greatest headlines of things that I think that you should be paying attention to. I always, for those that kind of don't know, um, I always focus on news narratives. So whether you think that I agree with something or don't agree with something or whatever have you, I'm mostly talking about how how people are talking about it, what the narrative is, and what it might mean for how it affects you, your business, retirement, all this type of thing. And that's kind of where my focus always naturally goes towards. I am like your friend who is a constantly online kind of news, news person, the chronically online, pays attention to the news way too much, sort of thing. I'm that friend who does that, and since you don't want to do that or be that, I will tell you about what I found while I was online. And so that's kind of the theme of the show and what we do. I usually cover anywhere between 7 to 11 stories that I think are important, but I want to remind everyone that in the stories I cover here on the News Hour are different than I cover in my newsletter. If you want to subscribe to the Cameron Journal newsletter, it comes out every Saturday, and you can sign up at cameronjournal.com/newsletter. If you love this journalism, love the coverage, and want to support it, make sure to sign up for Cameron Journal Plus, which is my premium membership. It gets you special access to me and to private events and all this sort of thing. And I have a gaggle of paying subscribers, so thank you everybody if you're a subscriber to the Cameron Journal. And I want to encourage everyone to subscribe to that because it's the best way to support this journalism and make sure that shows like mine continue to exist, which I think are very important to do. So, with all that out of the way, and if you're already on Substack and can't stand the thought of opening another account or anything, don't worry. I'm also on Substack too. CameronJournal.substack.com. You can get really the best of the Cameron Journal because I just post the newsletter and videos and all this sort of thing. And a lot of the other stuff that I do at the Cameron Journal, which is a full-on publication. And that's also as an option for you as well. One of the graphics I should make at some point is our slogan here, which is "The world is hard, this is not," and which is an excellent way to summarize kind of how I cover things and the unique thing that I do. I also want to mention right now that my new book, America's Lost Generation, is out now. I wrote out the story of millennials in the post-financial crisis through the lens of what happened to Japanese young people after their property crisis in 1991. And I analyze everything from economic trends to dating, the smartphone, social media, parenting and families, all these dynamics and talk about why, at least economically speaking, millennials are probably the unluckiest generation in American history. We may not have had to die in any wars, although many did die in Iraq and Afghanistan because those wars went on for so long. We may not have had a World War II or a World War I, but we have been fighting a battle all of our own, and it's a battle for survival in this economy, and trying to find a partner, and trying to decide whether or not to have children, and trying to buy a house, and trying to live in today's economy. And the book gets into all of those things. And so I just want to highlight that for everybody. If you haven't had a chance to pick up a copy, you can do so at any fine bookstore, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Waterstones if you're in the UK. But if you really want to support me, CameronJournal.com. Just click on Shop Cameron's Books, and it's easy to find. Checkout is super fast, and make sure to check that out. So, you know about the newsletter, you know about the book. The world is hard. This is not. So maybe let's dive into some headlines. And the one I want to start with this evening, let me do this and this, is I want to dive right into, well, we'll get to Marge. So I agree with Marge Taylor Greene on something, which is weird. We're going to come back to Marge. What we're going to start with is Trump's Antifa roundtable with journalists and officials. This happened last Wednesday. And he says here that President Donald Trump convened a White House roundtable featuring independent journalists like Andy Ngo and Nick Sorter, who shared accounts of Antifa assaults in Portland and Seattle. Officials, including Attorney General Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel, detailed plans to dismantle Antifa networks, probe over $100 million in funding sources, including taxpayer dollars, and pursue federal prosecutions under a recent executive order. Trump directed Secretary of State Marco Rubio to explore designating Antifa as a foreign terrorist organization due to its international ties. And it mentions, particularly here, some of the funding sources identified, including George Soros and the Open Society Network, Arabella Funding Network, the Tides Fishing Network, Neville Roy Singham and his network, Johann George Hans-Jörg Weiss, a billionaire donor in Switzerland, and additional foreign cash. It says it's also big left-wing funders, some of them who are not citizens of this country, Mr. Hans-Jörg Weiss of Switzerland, and they're pouring money into this entire ecosystem. Quote, we have identified dozens of radical organizations, not just the decentralized Antifa organizations, but dozens of radical organizations that have received more than $100 million from Riot Inc. investors. I think the most shocking thing is that we found more than $100 million in U.S. taxpayer funding has flowed into these funding networks as well. And there was a lovely statement from Pam Bondi talking about how she was going to tear the organization apart.
It's breaking down the organization brick by brick. Just like we did with cartels, we're going to take the same approach, President Trump, with Antifa. Destroy the entire organization from top to bottom. We're going to take them apart. Thanks to your bold leadership and the...
There's not really a top to bottom. We'll get that in a moment. And the... And so obviously there's, different reactions and all this sort of thing. It says, they wanted info on people who burned the American flag that he rescued in Portland. Trump, you know who the man is? Sorter, yes I do. Give Pam the information so we can start the prosecutions, which is lovely political theater. And people kind of forget that the Supreme Court already verified that burning the flag was actually free speech. But never us mind about all that. It's but anyway, this whole roundtable, very performative in many ways. The thing that I think is funny about Antifa and why this news narrative is unhelpful in so many ways, and I wrote about this a little bit in the newsletter on Saturday, is that Antifa exists as a concept, a vague ideology, but it's really networks of groups, and not even that well organized of groups, that are willing to do violent things in order to resist this president, this administration, and anywhere that they decide fascism and authoritarianism are thriving. And so when Pam Bondi says we're going to take them down brick by brick from top to bottom, there's not really a top to bottom to go after. And the most convenient thing about Antifa is that because it doesn't really exist, it doesn't it's not an organization with any sort of leadership or central committee or anything like that. Because it doesn't really exist, you can make anything Antifa. So anytime that there's a protest outside of an ICE facility or whatever have you, and there's violence involved, oh, well, that's Antifa. Now, the reality is it's really anarchists, anarcho-libertarian people, anarcho-communists, all this sort of thing, who are the fringe of any protest movement. We had them at Occupy. The fringe of any protest movement that are actually doing this. The people who probably organized the protest were not affiliated in any way to do that. However, from a narrative perspective, the fact that Antifa doesn't really exist as anything beyond a battle cry of several fringe left-wing organizations that, this is worth mentioning, not affiliated with the Democratic Party, makes it very easy, because then anything can be Antifa. When there's a word that's been popularized but it doesn't exist, there's no there, you can then apply it to anything and make it real. So you can find whatever organization and say, oh, that's Antifa. So because of this narrative, it becomes so broad that, one, you have the public thinking, oh, we're fighting Antifa because they're doing really bad things and they're attacking police and causing violent protests and all this type of thing. But then you also can make any resistance to what's happening, especially around ICE and immigration, and that's where the bulk of this is coming from. The AI summary is like, oh, assaults in Portland and Seattle, but they never tell you what those assaults were about. And it was about ICE detention facilities. It was people trying to stop and thwart the work of ICE, doing immigration raids. Regardless of how you feel about that, that's the part that's not being said, which means you can then take anyone who's attempting to stop ICE and immigration raids and all this sort of thing, and you can say that they're Antifa. When you start talking about designating them a foreign terrorist organization due to international ties, or even a domestic terrorist organization, which they did do, but that doesn't really exist, then you can make anyone and anything that. And in that way, from a narrative perspective, it becomes the perfect domestic boogeyman. So when we start having conversations about instituting martial law, with the president taking over cities with National Guard troops in the guise of crime, which really the crime is just trying to allow ICE to continue its work. Because remember, when the National Guard went into LA, it was to protect the federal ICE facility in downtown LA, which had been blocked off by protesters. That's where that started from. In Chicago and Portland, it's the same playbook. And one of the first things that's happened after Chicago has National Guard troops there, it then becomes there's an ICE raid in this apartment building where they're arresting women and children and people who don't have an immigration case. They just arrest the entire building, 900 people. That's what is. And unfortunately, when we get into authoritarianism, and we start talking about government overreach, which sending the National Guard into cities certainly is, then it's like, well, what is the specific problem you're going to stop? Now, people will say, well, haven't we sent in the National Guard to stop protests before? Yes, we have. Though there was very specific instances where that happened. It happened with the consent of state governors who maybe felt overwhelmed with the resources at hand. It's not unknown. This is unique because it's specifically protecting federal facilities. And to be very honest with you, it's also protecting a certain amount of what I would consider overreach. A lot of, when it comes to mass deportations, I do not agree with my open borders colleagues who think we shouldn't have immigration law at all. Quite the opposite. I would like a robust and stringent immigration system. I think that's a good thing. And that goes for H-1B visas too, not just people who pick vegetables. What they're doing, the way they're going about it, is particularly insidious. And it is not to the letter of the law, and certainly not in its spirit. And that's usually where a lot of people begin to break down. As one might expect, people were protesting about this sort of thing. Now, I don't mind a nice nonviolent protest. But the reality is, any protest that has teeth is going to involve a certain amount of civil disobedience. It's going to involve a certain amount of people getting arrested for various and sundry things. That's part and parcel of a protest movement with teeth that's more than performative. This reaction is, I think, a bit heavy-handed, but only because it's the perfect foil to allow them to continue the type of federal government overreach that we have now become familiar with. And I think that is, in this way, the media is not serving the public well by not talking about what Antifa actually is. It's a concept, came from 4chan. It's a concept, it's a vague ideology, but in so much as the government can make it be whatever it is, so do the people that are a part of it. But again, there's nothing really to join. It's really a gaggle of left-wing groups around the country who've come around to a certain ideology, and they have decided that the government's movement in this area is fascist. And so this news narrative becomes very dangerous, because Antifa will then become anything and everything, and it becomes the ultimate boogeyman. In any sort of authoritarian regime in the 20th century, it is very easy for the government, and this is even true when you know who the enemy is, it is very easy in the name of public safety for a government to do a lot of terrible things. Japanese internment is a classic example. And then we knew who the enemy was, Japan. They were a real thing, a real place, real, people in uniform sort of thing, a very, formal sort of thing. But that extends to, well, any Japanese person can be a threat, so we must lock away all of them. It is very easy for government to do very terrible things going after something. And when that something is vague and doesn't have the type of organization that you can take down and take apart, cartels are more organized, then it can become a foil for anything. And that puts us all in a very dangerous position. A very, very dangerous position. Because when Antifa can be anything, anything is Antifa. So if there's something inconvenient, or you want to shut down protest entirely, or you want to arrest some people, you can just, they're Antifa. It's the same. It was the same dynamic under communism. Oh, they said something against the party. Oh, they're against the party. They're anti-communist, whatever have you. When it has a very vague meaning, you can then apply it to anything and everything, and that is quite dangerous. This meeting is not surprising, and who was there is not terribly surprising. Although I would have loved to have been invited to say, okay, well, all right, we can investigate these NGOs for the funding. That makes sense. We can find out, who is or is not paying for these groups to be able to travel and do this sort of thing. Well, let's also count up what is the real problem here. And oh, by the way, does not anyone here in this room understand Antifa doesn't actually exist as any sort of organization? It's a concept with a vague ideology that roughly can be described as anti-fascist. But no one's terribly interested in having that type of conversation. But like I said, the funding list and who that they said were funding quote-unquote Antifa is very interesting. Definitely look for these names to be in the news a lot more. It's no surprise that George Soros is at the top of the list. He funds a lot of left-wing groups, and anything he's connected to can become Antifa. But you're going to see these names a lot more in the news. But here's the problem: I think this idea of, we're going after Antifa is going to be any left-wing group that shouts too loud about what the administration is doing. Because again, Antifa doesn't actually exist, which means it can be anything and everything and be anywhere. The other thing that I also thought was rather interesting, Kash Patel said here that the FBI is tracking down all money for Antifa and will go after criminals with a vengeance. Here's the thing, is it's not really money for Antifa, it's money for leftist groups that they can connect to the protests at ICE facilities that we're going to call Antifa. That's what that really means. Well, it doesn't fit well in a tweet. And that's where this narrative begins to break down. and I love Mehdi Hassan, he's just making it up and there are zero consequences for his lies. Every media organization, every newspaper front page, even every nightly news broadcast should be leading with the president is lying about the situation in Portland. But our media is broken and won't do it. And this is my problem with the media is the media never talks the media never has the conversation I'm trying to have with people right now to say, here's the reality of the situation, or here's what this really is, or here's why this actually matters. Here's how it does or does not affect your life. Portland has a lot of issues and problems, and it has for some time. Unlike Seattle, where we tried to take on some of it, Portland never really has, and that is an extremely unfortunate, unfortunate situation. And for a lot of these, it's it's a left-wing city with a homeless problem and there's crime, but most importantly, there's people protesting against the administration or protesting against ICE. That's what a lot of these places and things have in common. And that's a very important thing to mention. You get lovely posts like this: hey Antifa, your reign of terror is almost over. Well, it never started, so it's very easy to end it. And that, yes, looking at the media, my question for all of you: how would you feel if every time you showed up to work, masked militants try to kill you? Because that's how we feel. That's our lived reality. Then you go and tell us we're liars, the riots aren't that bad, right? I've never seen any of you guys on the ground. In fact, I've never seen anybody representing the companies you work for on the ground. Stop saying we're lying. We're not. We risk our lives every day to do the job you guys are afraid to do. That's fair, and I'm not saying that people who are quietly trying to go to work at the ICE facility should have to deal with that sort of thing every day, and you can certainly bump up security, but at a certain point, especially when working in government, your work and your job is going to interact, sometimes conversely, with people's right to protest about it. If I wanted to be, not, and I think he has a great point, but if I wanted to be, kind of an asshole about this, I could say, well, neither does a woman going into an abortion clinic, but that never stopped them, now did it? And that's why this isn't useful. That whole discussion isn't useful. What is useful is understanding what this is actually about. What is useful is understanding that, very obviously, this administration is taking a very hard line on immigration, and people are unhappy about that. Now, how we solve that is going to be up to them, and we get an excellent idea of what this is. But instead of trying to address the real problem, they're going to address Antifa. And that opens the doors to a lot of other authoritarian tendencies down the road. Anyway, enough of that. Let's move on to the next one. On the study newsletter, wrote a lot about some of the upcoming Supreme Court cases. But this opinion piece I wanted to kind of get back into for the news hour. And it says here, should they just go ahead and put up a gold Trump sign on the Supreme Court? And this was a conversation between Emily Bazelon and David French. And it says here that, it's talking about some of the cases that are coming up. And so David French says, can I share the executive power case that alarms me the most? It's called Trump versus Slaughter. And the first question is whether the court will overrule a 1935 case called Humphrey's Executor, which upheld limits on the president's ability to fire a member of the Federal Trade Commission. The question of the president's authority over independent agencies or commissions is important. Most conservatives, me included, believe Humphrey's Executor was wrongly decided, and that the president should be able to fire the heads of agencies that operate in the executive branch. But there's a second question in that case, and the answer could have more enormous implications. The court has asked parties to brief and argue whether a federal court may prevent a person's removal from public office either through relief or at equity or at law. The implications here are staggering. Could a president really just sweep through the civil service, firing everyone at will, and then sit back and wait to be sued for damages, all while he runs wild with something that looks a lot like the old spoils system of the 19th century? And Emily replies, here's an argument that Humphrey's Executor was rightly decided when Congress established some of the federal agencies we're talking about, including the Federal Trade Commission in 1914 and the Federal Communications Commission in 1934, and then added more later, like a National Health Department in 1953 and the Federal Election Commission in 1974. It is intended for the agency's leaders to have some independence from the executive branch. Congress said the president had to have cause to fire an agency head, meaning that he or she was corrupt or a bum or whatever. That's how the federal government has functioned for more than 90 years, since the Supreme Court said yes to that structure in Humphrey's executor. It's a basic part of the architecture. Would Congress have designated all this authority to the agencies without the assurance that the president couldn't replace their heads to serve his personal political interests? To move on to your excellent point about the second question in the case, I agree it's breathtaking. How is this supposed to work if the whole civil service can be canned by any president at any time? Oh wait, we're finding out what that looks like in real time with 150,000 federal employees losing their jobs so far, and Trump threatening many more layoffs given the current government shutdown. If the government ranks get refilled in every new administration, a ton of institutional knowledge and skill walks out the door. And who will want these jobs? The honor of a lifetime of civil service helps draw people, many of whom would make more money in the private sector. And then David makes an excellent point. Give a president total firing power and combine it with his pre-existing pardon power over federal crimes, and you'd allow the federal government to be run as a criminal enterprise. Well, David, there you go. But then it gets into the tariff cases. But I wanted to highlight that one in particular because that's something where, based upon how the Supreme Court has acted so far, Trump's probably going to get his wish. And David points out very accurately that with total firing power and pre-existing pardon power, you'd allow the federal government to run as a criminal enterprise. That's what's at stake in this case. If there's one thing that I think is kind of funny in political dynamics in this country and everything, is how the right cares a great deal about the Supreme Court and Supreme Court cases, because that's where a lot of social questions are decided. The left has never cared about the Supreme Court nearly as much, nor do they care about cases as much either. And so it's kind of, so I'm trying to encourage us to actually pay attention to these things, because these things can radically change life for all of us and how government operates and how it interacts with us. It gets into the tariff cases and whether the president can create tariffs without congressional approval, and how much deference the court will give to the president when he invokes his power over foreign policy and international diplomacy. And also he brings up at kind of the end of that, you see the theme here, who really has the power to check a president? And that should be the other two branches. That's their job, the co-equal branches. And it seems like all of a sudden the courts and Congress are not comfortable with doing that, but that's also partly because the Republican Party has all three branches of government in a rough ideological chokehold. The Supreme Court is 6-3 conservative. Congress is controlled by the Republicans. The White House is controlled by Republicans. You know, they've got, so it's a matter of not if the president can be judged. That question's already been answered by the Constitution. He absolutely can. It's whether they'll actually do it or not. That's the question. And that is, you know, the fact that we're still discussing that in the year of our Lord 2025 in this republic, this small r Republican democracy, is quite troubling. The last one I want to talk about that I did write about on Saturday in the newsletter was the Colorado conversion therapy case. Colorado wrote an extremely broad law. It says here, Colorado's definition of conversion therapy included banning efforts to change behaviors or gender expressions. When applied to talk therapy, you're talking about restricting, for example, a therapist helping a Christian or Muslim kid align his behavior with his own moral values. And if you grant a state the ability to ban a particular kind of talk therapy, then wants to stop a state from doing the reverse, banning therapy that's affirming of LGBTQ kids. And also Colorado wrote the law very broadly so conversion therapy could continue, but obviously a lot of people who've been through conversion therapy were happy that Colorado banned it, and they want that law to stay. The Supreme Court probably isn't going to let them keep it. The other one is there's 3 cases that would allow states to be permitted to reserve women's sports to biological females, and those will probably all go through, which will rather be the end of all that question. And it gets into the details of all of this. You can go read this if you would like to, but that's what's happening in the Supreme Court right now. Like I said, I wrote about this on Saturday, but I wanted to go over some of these cases because this term upcoming in the Supreme Court is going to be heavy. We've got tariffs, we've got presidential firing powers of independent agencies, we've got gay conversion therapy, we've got trans stuff. So the cases will start now in October, we'll get rulings in June, and it's going to be a raucous set of decisions coming out. And given the composition of the court, we pretty much know how all these cases are going to go. And I would just advise everyone to not get tired or not get frustrated, because this is how it goes. The reality is the Republican Party has spent quite a few years now working their will to make sure that they get a court that agrees with them ideologically to stop a lot of the social changes that have been coming out of the left and the Democratic Party, especially on social issues. And they've now got their wish, which means that we're going to see some very troubling decisions come across. I don't think there's a case this term, but we're going to see a gay marriage case pop up here soon, which will return it back to the states where it used to be. It used to be if you wanted to get gay married, you had to go to California or Massachusetts. So there's some troubling things that are going to come along. This is the push and pull and tug of democracy. Some of these things I agree with, some of these things I don't. I don't think the president should have tariff power without Congress. Congress is supposed to set those tariffs, and that should be that way, although there is a law to do that. The banning trans women from sports, I think, is probably, by and large, a good idea because of the profound biological differences that happen as boys and girls mature into young men and young women. And no amount of hormones or surgery can change a lot of that stuff. So I think, out of fairness, I think that's probably going to make sense, despite the fact of how it makes people feel and the message that it sends to the trans community, which I also understand as well. When it comes to the whether Trump can fire somebody, that's probably going to be decided in his favor, which then brings us back to the headline: should they just go ahead and put up a gold Trump sign on the Supreme Court? There was another article I talked about a couple weeks ago that talked about how friendly, I think it was titled "The Supreme Court Finally Has a President It Likes," sort of thing, talking about how friendly the court was to Trump. And I'm sure that has partly to do with the fact that 3 of them are sitting there because of him. He got the appointments in his first term. And we're going to be living with the consequences of that for a long while. Because Amy Coney Barrett's pretty young, so is Brett Kavanaugh. And if somebody dies in the next couple of years, we'll have even more. So, and Biden only got to do 1. So it's a quite difficult thing. So big shout out to Justice Jackson and Sotomayor and Elena Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson, for being the last holdouts in an institution that is going a different direction. I want to stop by Sarah Kendzior's Substack quickly. She did an interview with some people from Panopticon, which I actually want to go to at some point. And I never get to go to fun things. But I want to go and to go to that at some point. But she has some interviews here, and the thing I was interested in reading about all of this was some of the stuff on AI. It says here that like the internet research right now, it says the loss of working search engines and easy access to information is a tremendous crisis for researchers, especially when coupled with AI. Here are some suggestions. First, all AI content needs to be labeled as such. Second, we need far more curation, including preservation of digital-only works. Third, anyone who can make their website free should do so. I am a lone writer in Missouri, and I keep my work free, yet millionaire media groups claim they can't. As a result, we end up with a slew of paywalled "here's the only way to save democracy" articles with the answer blocked. People pay to bypass the wall and land in a gated community of Stepford pundits. These pseudo-resistors prey on fear for profit. They are the regriftants. very true. Most of the Cameron Journal is free, and I wish the regriftance would reach my doorstep. It never seems to. But I asked for you to join the Cameron Journal Plus, but I tend not to put I do have something behind the paywall, but I tend not to put too many things behind the paywall in the interest of keeping information open. But I wish some of that money would get over to me. Never seems to. The war on information is a war on the future by way of destroying the past, especially the recent past. I worry that the history of the first quarter of the 21st century will be annihilated. When I look back on my books, I know I could never uncover all that corruption today, partly because search engines are broken, partly because media's censored outlets have gone under. My endnotes have become dead ends. Boy, do I feel about that. I see so many of the stuff that I did in the mid-2010s for, like, the early essays and What the Hell's Going On. I recently uploaded all that work to the Cameron Journal. It's in the What the Hell's Going On collection, and it's kind of my core work sort of thing. And many of my endnotes have also become dead ends, and things that I link to are not anything. Is this here? I encourage folks to print out articles, make copies as Word docs, save them on Internet Archive, anything. Hopefully there will be a more organized preservation movement in the future. Given the enormous amount of vital digital information out there, every effort helps, even if it's not public yet. Someday a writer may post that they're looking for something, and you may be the person who can provide it. And then they get into Stephen Miller, and the little clip of him talking about plenary power, and that, Trump could be, dictator if he wanted to, sort of thing. Which is funny because CNN edited that out, which was quite entertaining. And then it gets into economic boycotts, and it gets down here to, I found it this weekend. Where is it? In the old days, I would have printed this out and highlighted it. And lots of left liberal stuff about Gaza, and here it is, linking back to the story we just talked about regarding Antifa. It says here, I am more worried about ICE, which has been trained to be lethal and lawless for decades, than I am about the military, but I know that the Trump administration's dream is Kent State on an exponential level. They will try to get the military to attack fellow citizens. I do not know if soldiers will do it. Many join the military purely for money. They can't find another job. They want to pay for college and so on. Shooting random Americans is not what they signed up for, but they may be hesitant to disobey orders and face repercussions. If folks have to stay in the military as just resisting through feigned incompetence and Bartleby-style refusal, an underrated strategy of surviving an authoritarian takeover is to seem like an absolute moron who can't figure out orders well enough to follow them. And then Jen says, I started listening to you back when you published this article. I've learned so much from you. I don't understand how the people can harness their majority. To now overthrow the oligarchy-backed government. We know that this is an international crime syndicate. How do we throw these motherfuckers off now? How do I convince people to give a shit about my kids' future when they barely give a shit about their actual lives now? This crisis is not our fault. It's our burden. We can't do a citizen's arrest of a mafia state. We cannot vote out the mafia, though we can try not to vote them in. There were many off-ramps and opportunities for officials to curtail this disaster. The best opportunities were between 2015 and 2018. Officials threw those away, and ordinary people pay the price. I do think people give a shit about your kid's future. I care. People are often afraid to express concern because they don't know the answers and fear rejection. But we are more likely to find solutions if we are creative, and creativity requires vulnerability and honesty. The first step is admitting the scope of the crisis and proceeding from there, finding points of leverage against the oligarch insult. At the same time, build your own refuge. Refuge can become subterfuge when you're up against the soulless. There's no guidebook for the situation we're in, not with digital surveillance. That component makes it new. We have to write the guidebook ourselves, and it may be a sloppy, messy thing, but it has to be ours. Don't count on institutions, and for the love of God, do not ask AI. Trump and his cohort succeeded through malicious ingenuity and a deep understanding of power. We need creative and compassionate ingenuity, but with that same grasp of power, and I mean grasp. Nobody gives you real power. Real power is something you take. And to prove my willingness to take things, I stole that line from Jock Ewing on Dallas. But it's true. So, I'm not a huge fan of Kara St. Kendzior. She's to the left of me, but I thought this conversation was interesting. If you want to go check it out, you should do so on her Substack. And we're gonna get to now we get to the good part. We get to Marge. So let's set this up. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Congresswoman from Georgia, she has become rather well known for saying some very extreme things and acting a fool at everything from State of the Union speeches to any time a Democrat is speaking. However, some recent clips of her on the Ron Smith podcast, well, let's watch and you'll see what I'm talking about.
What he's trying, his long-term goal, but we're having problems with these tariffs. And now we're having problems. We can't get supplies from this country, and we can't get supplies from this country. And there's problems. But have regular people's bank accounts been affected? Has the stress come off? No, that has not happened yet, and that needs to be the major focus. It shouldn't be about helping your crypto donors or your AI donors or welcoming in these people that hated you and spent money to try to beat you, but all of a sudden are excited to come out to the new Rose Garden patio.
Yes.
That shouldn't be the focus. The focus should be the people that showed up at the rallies, stood there for freaking 18 hours trying to get in the rain, in the cold, in the 100-degree heat. For those people, those are the ones that I care about. Those are the ones that voted for not only the president, but every single Republican, gave us power. I don't think those people are being served.
You know what, Marge? You're not wrong. And I think it's interesting that someone who has been part and parcel of Trump's time in office and has been part and parcel of the MAGA movement and has been out there like she's been out there, is coming along saying the White House isn't focused on regular working people and that a lot of their policies are negative. Yeah, Marge, we're paying the tariffs. We tried to tell you. We tried so hard to explain to you a tariff is a tax on us. Now, its job is to make foreign imports less competitive. But in our modern globalized economy, all it does is make stuff more expensive. All we're doing is sending Washington, D.C. extra money. And they already get a lot that they spend poorly. And we're giving them more. Like, yes, no, prices have not come down. Everyone who voted for lower prices has gotten completely screwed over. Inflation's up 3%. You know, like, it's not, you know... It's, yeah. And I kind of laugh because so many people should have understood that a year ago when we were getting ready to vote. So many people should have understood that, 6 months ago when we started with, Liberation Day, and we kept explaining to people this isn't a good thing. And now finally that her citizens, her district folks, her constituents, are coming up and complaining. Now all of a sudden, Trump's not working for the working person. Oh, and he's working for crypto and AI people. Well, it gets even more crazy because we bounce over here and Marjorie Taylor Greene has more to say. On Israel, no less, which for the right has become all but a third rail, almost as bad as Social Security. Let's hear what Marge has to say.
Have to continue to give them $3.8 billion every single year because it's for their defense. Right. We have to fund their Iron Dome. But by the way, Israel has, they have state-funded healthcare. They have state-funded education, college education. Israel is not anywhere in debt like we are. They're in less than $400 billion in their national debt. We're in $37 trillion in national debt.
In the aid that we give them, it's very possible that their state health care and their state education, the United States of America is paying for that.
All money is fungible.
Right.
All money is fungible.
Right.
No one can ever say it's not. All money is fungible.
That's right.
And then, but here's the most interesting thing. These other foreign countries, they're not taking our members of Congress on trips that last for weeks on August recess periods. That's not happening.
I guess they should start.
Seems
effective.
They may be. That's the pushback. Is all these other countries, they spend a lot more money on lobbying Congress. But I'm like, yeah, but Israel's the only one really coming out, getting our military to fight all their wars for them.
When I saw this weekend, I dropped my phone. I was kind of like, whoa. I mean, obviously this isn't going to change anything right away. But again, this is the Cameron Journal Newshour. We talk about news narratives here. Narratively speaking, when you have someone with that type of public profile and that big of a wheel in the MAGA movement coming out and literally dropping to be kind of like, yeah, but we're the one fighting the wars for them and they're costing us money. They have better stuff than we do and their national debt isn't as much and all this type of thing. And it's MTG saying this. I mean, if this were some sort of moderate Republican from Iowa or something, this wouldn't be news. But when, the queen of MAGA is saying, like, well, Israel's got better programs and whatnot than we do, and maybe we should have those things and help some working people and not give them, all this money and all this type of thing. That's a lot. I mean, I almost want to be kind of like, well, Marge, I mean, welcome to the Democratic Party, I guess, and we'll join the club. I mean, but I think the big sort of, narrative story here out of these clips is, one, she feels comfortable going on a podcast and talking about this. Two, the host isn't pushing back. And three, and I think most importantly about all of this, is very simple. It's where the median voter is at. It's where the regular person trying to pay their bills is at. It's where everyone who voted for Trump, maybe because they didn't like him that much, but they thought he'd be better on the economy because things were not great under Biden, all this type of thing, are looking around and being like, what's improved? What's changed? Not much. Everything's gotten more expensive. Oh, and by the way, but Israel's check has gone through. Our government is shut down right now. I haven't really talked about the government shutdown that much. I haven't really made it a story, but they're going to shut down right now. We can't come together over healthcare subsidies. But Israel's check's gone through. And hell, we'll throw Ukraine under the bus too. Ukraine's check's gone through too. And I think where Marge maybe is at, and where everyone else is at, is when is it the American people's turn? When is it our turn for us to get the good stuff for us? When are we going to quit paying for everyone else's stuff? That was the whole point of Doge and getting rid of USAID, and all this type of thing. The whole point of that was to clear out government, get rid of the inefficiency, and make government work harder for you. Doge didn't make it 6 months. Elon was gone by Memorial Day. You haven't heard about the work from Doge in months. Sort of thing. That whole big giant never went anywhere. And so people, I think, are rightly asking, when is it our turn? When do we get the good stuff? And I don't blame them for asking. Not at all. And the fact that MTG is out here being like, I think this is some BS, that's quite telling. That's quite telling. So, anyway, that was the headline of the night. I agree with Marge, and she's right. I mean, I never thought I would agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene on anything. Ever in any universe, that would never be a thing. But you've heard it here first. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I agree with you. The tariffs are bad. We're not helping regular working people. And yeah, there's a lot of countries living off our largesse, and we should probably put a stop to that. Anyway, that's the hour. Well, almost 53 minutes. That's about the hour. I want to thank everyone for watching the Cameron Journal Newshour. Happy Columbus Day, or Indigenous Peoples Day, depending on how you feel about that. Happy day, Columbus or Indigenous. Put in whatever's comfortable for you. Anyway, happy Columbus or Indigenous Peoples Day, everybody. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour. Please find me on TikTok at Cameron Journal. Please also find me on Twitter, LinkedIn at Cameron Cowan, and on Instagram at Cameron Cowan, and Facebook.com/Cameron L. Cowan. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please make sure to share with your friends. Please make sure to follow me on social. I really appreciate it. It helps me grow. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter, CameronJournal.com/newsletter. I'm here every Monday at 7 p.m. I will see you next week. Thank you so much for watching. Talk soon now. Bye-bye.